In part 8, we talk about growing food.
When we were in Denmark, and specifically in Europe, we realized that we could repower the world. We just need the motivation to go and do it. But what we realized as we were getting to the end of our internship there was that one of the most important renewable energies that we have to take care of is our food. Every time we go out and we eat a calorie of food from the industrial food system, which is basically any food that comes from your local grocery store, it takes 10 calories of hydrocarbon to get that food to you. So we invest energy in the form of planting, spraying herbicides and pesticides, fertilizers, harvesting, processing, shipping, packaging, sending it to the grocery store, and then you drive your car to go pick it up and then bring it home and cook it and eat it. So if we were all coyotes running around chasing after our food and we had to invest 10 of our own calories into every calorie that we consume, we'd all starve to death. And if you start to look at that statistic a little bit differently, so from a slightly different angle, what you realize is that from one angle it's pretty negative that every calorie of food that we consume from the industrial food system takes 10 calories in. But from another angle, we can actually look at it in a really positive sense, which I like to look at it from that perspective. Specifically, every calorie of food that I grow displaces 10 calories of hydrocarbon energy from that industrial system. And so it gives one person the ability to actually have a massive change just by changing where he gets his food 3 times a day. So even though a garden doesn't seem like a really important piece of the sustainability puzzle, it actually ends up being a super important piece. We did a blog on our website called The Grass Isn't Greener, and the blog came out of a conversation that I had with a master's student from Scandinavia who called me up one day and said, can we actually feed our cities or our population within the land base of our cities? And I said, I don't know. And this guy was pretty sure that it couldn't be done. And so I said, well, what kind of assumptions have you made? And he said, well, I'm assuming that we're going to keep all of our golf courses and people are going to keep all of their front lawns. And I said, well, that's kind of ridiculous. If we're running out of phosphorus and we're running out of oil and we're running out of soil and we're running out of water, we're probably not going to continue operating this food system in the same way that we've been operating for the last 100 years. And so I left that conversation, I started doing some research, and what I found is that I couldn't find any stats for Canada, but in the United States I found that we're growing close to 40 million acres of land to grass, or front lawn, and close to 55 million acres of land to wheat. And when you work out the numbers, what happens is that if you just figured out how many calories you could grow on that land that we're currently growing in lawn, it turns out that we could grow enough calories off of that 40 million acres of land using very conventional yield numbers to feed the entire United States for 1 year off of one crop. And so there's more than enough land in our cities if we just stopped wasting it on all of this lawn. And I know what some of you are thinking. You're probably thinking, oh, I really want to have lawn for my kids. They like to play on those spaces. It's good for soccer. It's good for throwing the frisbee. I'm not against lawn. I'm just raising an interesting point here. I think that having spaces, parks, and lawns for congregation and for activities is really important. But I don't necessarily think that we all need to have front lawns, which absolutely never get used. So one of the things that we did was we took out our front lawn and we took out our back lawn because we wanted to see how much food we could actually grow. So on the front lawn, we replaced that with a food forest, which is a food system that is all based on perennial plants. So plants that grow every single year without having to plant them every single year. Now, a food forest is basically a food system that mimics a forest. So it has in between 6 and 7 layers. So we've got an overstory, a midstory, an understory, a shrub layer, a ground cover, a herbaceous layer, and a root layer. And within those layers, we can actually put all edible plants or useful plants that can be used within the household. And they can be either medicinal, edible, used for fuel, used for fiber, and Dave Jackie says pharmaceuticals with an F, so that's kind of the medicinal component. So here we've got a Perma Blitz happening. Perma Blitz is a community-supported installation mechanism where we've gone and put this food forest into the front yard. So it's really young in this picture. And we had about 10 people come in and put this system in a day. And you can see the progression of food forest from when it was going in all the way until it's completed now. And now in front of our house, we look like we have this veritable jungle where everything inside of it is edible. And so within our food forest, we have apples, we have goji berries, we've got saskatoons, we've got sea buckthorn, we've got strawberries and rhubarb and asparagus and cherries, and it goes on and on and on and on. And each of those plants will actually bear fruit or some sort of perennial vegetable at different times of the year. So we find ourselves out there almost every single day going out and picking food and bringing it into our kitchen. One of the other benefits that has occurred by having this food forest on our front lawn is we've actually got to know all of our neighbors. So when they see us out in our front lawn, or not front lawn, in our food forest, they're always asking questions like, what does this plant do? And what does that do? And inevitably what I end up doing is giving them a whole pile of food as well. And what that's done is it's connected them to this system. So now they actually really enjoy the system because they're benefiting from it. And so we've had no kickback from the neighbors. So nobody's come to us and said, oh man, I can't believe you took out your front lawn to put in this system. And in fact, we've had more compliments than I ever would have anticipated by creating this really unique garden space right on the front yard. In addition to that, we have the most insects on the block, we have the most bees on the block, we've got the most birds on the block that have all kind of made this their home. So it's really interesting to see how we can meet our needs with our own food needs within our household, at least for a part of the year, while also creating space for all of this other biodiversity and creating community around this space, which is now usable instead of, like most front lawns, which is not used whatsoever. As mentioned in an earlier slide, we totally redid the backyard. We put in the correct water harvesting features and we built these double arm reach beds. And every year, even though the backyard garden is so tiny, we pretty much cannot keep up with it from about July 1st all the way till the end of September. And we're growing things like kale and squash and cucumbers and peas and beans. And every year it changes a little bit, but there's an enormous amount of vegetables that come out of this small space. And it makes you realize that we wouldn't actually need that much more growing space to grow the majority of the food, specifically the greens, that we require on an annual basis. Because of our passive solar greenhouse, we're able to grow much hotter climate type crops. That's one of the challenges of growing in a place like Calgary that gets 100 frost-free days and has cold nights because of our proximity to the mountains. So we grow all of our tomatoes and peppers in there and our cucumbers. And then in order to get season extension, one of the things that we've done quite a bit of experimentation with is we actually grow oyster mushrooms on straw. And Paul Stamets from fungi.com actually has an oyster mushroom kit. So you can actually take all those coffee grounds from Starbucks or any of those coffee stores and you can inoculate them with spawn from Paul. And you end up getting these oyster espresso mushrooms, which kind of actually have a bit of an espresso color to them, and use this waste product that normally just goes to landfill to grow copious amounts of mushrooms. It's pretty interesting to see how my children have responded to this food forest as well. Every morning in the summertime, Rowan is literally, my oldest son, is literally banging at the front door trying to get outside to go and get the day's raspberries or the strawberries or the saskatoons or whatever berry is ripe. And he knows exactly where to go at every time of the season to go and get those berries. So it's really interesting to see how it's had an impact on my children as well and how they're learning about where food actually comes from.